Hey guys, this is Cassidy, and today we're going to read the last two chapters of Not a Drop to Drink. And I don't know about you, but I'm excited. So, we get started. Alright, Chapter 21. It was bitterly cold when they emerged in the dead of night to meet Stubbs. They huddled together for warmth, not even bothering to tease the older man when he came from the direction of the stream rather than his own house. When he handed a backpack to Eli, the fumes of gasoline rolled off him in waves. "Careful with that. That's the last of the gasoline I had stored up in my basement," Stubbs warned as Eli shouldered it. "Here's a lighter. Didn't want to take the chance of a breeze with matches." "How long have you had a lighter?" Lynn asked. He shrugged. "Since forever." "Asshole." They headed south and walked in silence, except for the clinking of bottles in Eli's backpack. When they reached the ridge, Stubbs gave her a foot up into her tree and then settled into a thick bow. They moved off toward the east, where Stubbs had found a suitable place to take his own shots nearer town. Eli would wait for him. Eli's goodbye was quick and silent, the flash of a white hand through the darkness as he waved. Lynn unstrapped her rifle and tucked her handgun into the back of her waistband. A light snow began to fall as she waited for the sun to rise. When it did, it came fast, the gray pre-dawn haze burning off quickly as the sun peeked over the horizon. Lynn could see men moving inside the houses, their dark forms anonymous behind the curtains. The sentry had not come out yet. She shifted position and dried her palms on her jeans. The hall guard emerged, pissed in his yard, and made his way to the post. Roger led the cow out to pasture. Her father appeared on his porch, coffee in hand. Her gaze skittered off him nervously. They had agreed that though he was the leader, it was important to take the sentry and hall guard out first. Her father had won third place in that lottery. Lynn's first shot was for the sentry, Stubbs the hall guard. After that, they would fire at will, each picking their own target. Lynn hadn't argued, though she had hoped it would be her bullet that downed her father. She watched him through her scope, wondering what Mother would feel to know that the smoke from the south was caused by a fire from her past. Father was a conversation that never happened, a ghost that had never lived. Lynn had always believed he was dead, and perhaps Mother had as well. But he was alive and had never come for them. He'd abandoned them, and the only thing she'd ever give him would be delivered through the talents her mother had wanted her to master. There was comfort for her in the idea that the shot she'd fired too late for the coyote might be redeemed yet. His face in the crosshairs made her finger curl around the trigger, anxious for the only comfort Mother could offer from the grave. Father spat out his mouthful of coffee and crossed the road where the hall guard sat, rifle across his knees. They exchanged words. Her father shook his head and walked over to the yellow house where the women were kept and pounded on the door until Bluecoat answered. He went inside, and the tower sentry emerged moments later, shrugging his own coat over his shoulders. Lynn tracked him to the tower, waiting for him to settle into his perch before clicking the safety off her gun. She could only assume that Stubbs was watching as well, that Eli was prepared for her shot. She flattened her torso and inhaled, holding the breath. She fired. From that distance, the features of the sentry's face were unclear, but the bullet's exit was easy to see. A spray of blood rained down from the tower, followed quickly by his rifle, then his corpse. They reacted to the shot before his body hit the ground. Men erupted from the houses like bees from a disturbed hive, pale faces pressed against the windows in the upper floor of the yellow house. Lynn spotted Eli speeding up the near bank of the stream as the hall guard rose from his chair, his head cocked in a question. The guard shouldered his rifle, shouting at the other men as he crossed the parking lot for a good look at the tower. Her father ran toward the men, shouting directions. Lynn drew a bead on him just as Eli came into their view, the lit Molotov dangling from his hand. He threw it in a graceful arc, all eyes trailing it as it exploded in a river of fire onto the shingles. Her father's reaction was immediate. He yelled at the hall guard, who spun on his heel. Stubbs and Lynn fired at the same time, her crosshairs trained on father. He fell, clutching a shattered shoulder. His hand dangled lifelessly from the dead arm, his gun useless on the ground. The hall guard dropped to his knees and fired at Eli before Stubbs' bullet could reach him. The guard's brain exploded through the back of his head, but not before the bullet hit Eli's backpack. Eli became a living ball of fire. Lynn screamed from her perch, watching helplessly as the arms that had held her only hours ago pinwheeled in agony. Drops of liquid fire flew from his fingertips and sputtered out onto the road. She knew exactly how many bullets she had and could afford to waste none. One shot could deliver him from his own gasoline-soaked skin. The bullet seemed to fly slowly, protracting every second of his torment. Lynn kept her eye on the scope, unable to look away from the path of the only bullet she had ever fired with love in her heart. Lynn dropped to the ground and rushed downhill toward town. The smell of smoke was strong in the air. Black plumes rose above the hall roof. Stubbs was firing, but she had no view and didn't know if his shots were finding their targets. She flew downhill, arms spread wide to keep her balance as she ran. Roger was running uphill to meet her, rage contorting his face. She ran directly at him, her own fury disregarding the gun he held as she launched herself directly at him. Their bodies collided, and the stale reek of male sweat folded over her as they rolled downhill together, hands grabbing for purchase on each other's bodies. She gained her feet first, but he took her knees out from behind with his rifle stock. Lynn landed on her belly, the breath knocked out of her. He straddled her back and her lungs flattened farther as he pulled her head back by her hair. "What you think you're doing, girl? Playing war games?" He drove her face downward into the ground and she struggled against him. She tried to breathe, but inhaled only dirt. He pulled her face back up, taunting her. Men got two guns, you know. One for now," he tapped the barrel of his gun against her nose, "and one for later." When his free hand went to his zipper, she twisted underneath him, bringing her knee to his groin and pulling her knife from her boot. "Mother taught me to carry a knife for always." She left him holding his intestines in disbelief as she disappeared down the hill, his gun tucked securely in her waistband. She slid to a stop in a clearing and dropped her onto her belly to scan the village. Blue Coat disappeared inside the yellow house, emerging at a downstairs window with his rifle. He was pulled down in a flurry of white hands and kitchen knives. Green Hat was the only man attempting to stop the fire, but he was armed with a single bucket and losing the fight. Blackbeard was running to the east. Whether to escape or find Stubbs, she didn't know. One bullet dropped him. Her second shot finished the job. Her father had staggered into a blue house in the middle of town. Lynn saw a bloody hand draw curtains on the first floor, but it was the only flicker movement. Green Hat had given up. His bucket sat at his feet while he watched the hall go up in flames. Lynn scanned the trees, spotted Stubbs awkwardly making his way down from his post to the east. She fired a warning shot at Green Hat's bucket, sending it 10 feet in the air. He backed away, his hands up. Lynn emerged from the brush at the foot of the hill, her rifle trained on him. "I've got no issue with you," he said, voice shaking, "though I know you've got reason to have one with me." Lynn wandered onto the road, uneasily scanning the houses on either side of her. She spat some dirt from her mouth, ignoring the trickle of blood running down her neck from a gash that Roger had given her as they fell. Green Hat eyed her uneasily, raised hands shaking. "You armed?" Lynn asked. "No." He spread his jacket to show her. Never much liked the feel of a gun. She relaxed her grip on the rifle as Stubbs came into town from behind the church, his own gun trained on Green Hat. "Is he all right?" "Don't think he'll be a problem," she answered, and Stubbs lowered his gun. "Jasper's in the little house there," Green Hat said, gesturing toward the blue house father had gone into. "You winged him good, but he was moving okay last I saw. He lost his gun when you shot him, but that doesn't mean he's not dangerous as hell. There's still a truck out too," he went on. "4 men, though I doubt they're the type to come back if there's trouble." "We know," Lynn said stiffly, handing her rifle to Stubbs. "There's a man up the ridge that might call a bullet a favor." Stubbs glanced at her bloody face. "I suppose I don't much feel like granting favors today." Lynn nodded and backed away from him, forcing herself not to look at the smoldering black heap that had been Eli. The door of the yellow house opened and the youngest girl stepped out, the edges of a blanket clutched in her bloody hands. "Emma," Green Hat yelled, Stubbs and Lynn having vanished from his mind as he ran toward her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head and leaned against him. The other 2 women appeared in the doorway, glancing wearily at Stubbs and Lynn. "What are you going to do?" Stubbs asked Lynn. She checked her handgun before answering, handing Stubbs the extra she had taken from Roger. "I'm going to have a talk with my father." "Careful. I will be." "I'm sorry as hell about Eli," Stubbs said, not meeting her eyes. "I got that shot off as soon as I could." "It is what it is. I got other worries right now," she said as she walked away from him, her hammering heart screaming at the lie in her words. "Careful there," one of the women yelled at her. "He's a mean bastard, that one is. And tricksy." She touched a darkening bruise on her face as she spoke. Lynn tightened her grip on the gun as she opened the front door. Bloody footprints led her to the kitchen where her father sat at the table, slumped and pale. His right hand cupped the remains of his left shoulder. Bone fragments jutted out between his fingers. He summoned the energy to look up at her as she walked in, but his head dropped back to his chest immediately. A slow smile spread across his face. "The boys told me you was a pretty girl," he said with his eyes closed. She approached the table cautiously, her finger curled around the trigger and ready to fire. "You know who I am?" His eyes cracked open and he gave her a long, assessing stare before they closed again. "Have to be blind not to. You look just like her. Don't think there's a bit of me in you." Even bleeding and maimed, he was an imposing man. The bulk of his body spoke of capability. The shine of his eyes held unvented malice. "There may be a bit yet," Lynn said as she circled around behind him, checking for weapons. "I don't have a gun," he said. "Funny thing about your shoulder exploding, it makes you drop whatever you're holding. You ever been shot?" "Not yet." "You may as well have a seat and relax," he said calmly, closing his eyes again. "Not like I'm going to harm my own flesh and blood." "'Cause you can't or 'cause you wouldn't?" Lynn asked, lowering herself into the seat opposite him, her gun still trained on his chest. "Does it really matter? Either way, you can rest a spell. If that's your answer, I believe I'll stay out of your reach for now and keep my gun out, if it's all the same to you." One of his eyes opened to a slit, and he regarded her wearily for a moment. His answer came in a shrug from his uninjured shoulder. "You do as you please, girl." He licked his lips, and she saw the sheen of blood coating his tongue. "Is my bullet still in you? Went down through a lung, I'd say. Maybe little Emma over the street could patch it up, if you're inclined to let her." Lynn didn't answer. He cleared his throat. "Suppose you're wondering why I left. What I'm curious about is why you came back. Don't it make sense for a father to return to his only child?" Lynn's mouth twitched. She flexed her finger on the trigger. "Maybe, but you didn't. I'm here, ain't I? I think you came back to where there's water, somewhere you could control the flow and know the country." A small smile pulled out the corners of his mouth. "It is a good place, isn't it? It's our place." "Who's that? You and your mother? What'd she tell you about me?" "Nothing too nice." He grunted and spat a wad of blood-tinged phlegm on the floor. "She tell you that I bought you that puppy when you were still in her belly, so that the two of you could have some protection? Did she tell you that? Full-blooded German Shepherd he was. Would have been brown with black ears. I trained him up to keep you safe. Gave him to your mom before I left." "Yeah." Lynn shifted her gun with his movements, her sweaty palm sliding along the stock of gun. "We had to put him down 'cause of the rabies. Living thing goes mean like that, nothing for it but a bullet." Both his eyes opened, and he watched her carefully before speaking again, gaze trained on her unwavering gun. "I came myself, you should know, once or twice. The boys thought your mama was gone, but I wasn't so sure. I didn't want to wander too close and find myself in her crosshairs, with no love for me in her heart. Couple nights I stood out by the pond, wondering whether you were inside, hurting or grieving, whether you'd taken any comfort from my hand if I came to you." "Is that it?" Lynn asked, her eyes cool behind the barrel. "That's what you were thinking out there by my pond? Or were you waiting to smell me rotting before you came any closer?" He ignored her question. "I kept the boys from me, too. Roger would have liked to do more than fire a warning shot at you over that downed tree. Roger's got bigger worries now." "You kill him?" "Part way." His eyes slid shut again, and he stifled a laugh that brought a froth of blood to his lips. "Damn, you're a cold bitch. Nothing but contempt for your own flesh and blood, but you'll overnight a cripple and snot-nosed kid into the house I made safe for you. It's mine, make no mistake. Nothing's nobody's out here. Those who can, take, and there's no justice or higher power to appeal to. Till now," she said softly. His eyes opened, what blood there was left in his body burning in their heat. His lips twisted when he spoke next, the words slurred with angry memories. "And your mama, she set up a lemonade stand after I left, huh? Is that what she did? Offer comfort and a drink to every poor soul that wandered your way?" "No, but we never did any taking either, or hurting for the fun of it." One eyebrow twitched in response, but he had nothing to say to that. He rested his eyes for a moment. Fresh blood seeped out between his fingers, dripping from his elbow to the floor, where a small pool had begun to form between his feet. "You've done some low deeds, father. All's fair in love and war, my girl. What I had with your mother amounted to about the same thing. Guess it's down to you and me now, so which is it gonna be?" You hoarded water when people were dying of thirst, stole things you didn't need when you were surrounded by want. A slow laugh rumbled through his chest, and he opened his eyes to stare her down across the table. I don't know that your mama would approve of your soft ways. Maybe not, Lynn admitted, but she'd like this next part just fine. She shot him neatly in the forehead, leaving behind a black hole that was still smoking when she shut the door behind her. The frozen ground at the little cemetery beside the stream was stubborn, but Lynn had adrenaline on her side as she hacked out a grave beside Neva's. She worked relentlessly, ignoring the steady climb and descent of the sun, focused only on the task at hand. Blisters formed and burst on her hands, pus followed by blood, flowed down her fingers. She ignored the pain, intent on her digging. Stebbs had wrapped Eli in a blanket while she was inside with her father, sparing her the sight of his cracked, blackened skin. She lifted the body from the bed of the truck, disgusted by how light it was. She laid him tenderly into the hole on the ground and returned to work, throwing shovelfuls of frozen dirt on top of him, though she couldn't get the charred smell out of her nostrils until long after he was covered. She toppled the stones she'd stolen from the dam site out of the truck and rolled them over the grave, resting her hand lightly on the last one. I'm sorry to be doing this one alone, she said. I'm sorry it's yours. Lynn collapsed onto Neva's log, staring at the little cemetery while the billowing smoke rose to the south, the ashes of material things and men mixing with the light powdering of snow that dusted her shoulders as she wept. Alright, last part. Epilogue. Lynn climbed the antenna to the roof and stepped over Lucy's long legs to stand beside her as she surveyed the horizon to the east. What do you see? Not much going on tonight, Lucy answered. Looks like Brad's cow got out again. Emma will give him hell. And he'll love it, Lucy added, smiling. She set the binoculars beside her on the shingles. The new family that came in over to the south. What's their name? Robinson. Yeah, the Robinsons got a fire going, so the chimney must not have been blocked in that old house you picked. Lynn picked up the binoculars and looked at the thin column of smoke. They're burning dry wood, at least. Didn't figure him for an idiot, being as he's kept them alive wandering in the winter. Lucy shivered against the chill that permeated the air, even though crocuses had begun blooming on the west bank of the stream, over her mother's grave. Not sure how he managed with 3 children and all. From what we're hearing, things are bad in the city, Lynn answered, her mouth tightening. Man takes it on himself to wander into the wilderness with his family. Tells me it's true. Cholera? Your grandma says it seems so by the sounds of it. That girl Audra that wandered in last fall? She had stories to tell Vera that made her hair curl. Her hair's already curly. Lynn glanced sideways at the younger girl. Aren't you the smart one this evening? Lucy picked up her rifle and glanced down at the sight, smothering the little smile that played over her lips. Stebbs said the Robinson house had a good vein of water running under it, too. That's good. You can drop a line soon as spring comes. Lucy's mouth twitched as she peered into the scope of her rifle. Bet I could find a better vein. I bet you could keep your mouth shut about that, Lynn said. Anything else? Grandma said there's a new man over at Stebbs' old place, across the field. I saw him. Did you now? Lynn ignored Lucy's raised eyebrow. I imagine we'll walk over there soon and introduce ourselves. Sure could use a hand getting that piano out of the attic, Lucy continued. That's the last thing to come down. The Bennett lady said she'd teach me if I wanted to learn. That's a fine idea, but I'm not going to go inviting a strange man into the house for the sake of hearing you bang on a piano night and day. Lucy pulled herself into a sitting position, resting the rifle across her lap. They'd begun living in the upper floors of the house years ago, but Lynn only allowed Stebbs and Vera inside. I suppose we could get it down ourselves, Lucy conceded, if we're careful. And I suppose I could let the Bennett woman come on over, if we can get it down without smashing it to pieces, Lynn said, eyes still on the horizon. It would be nice to hear music again. Lucy nodded but didn't speak. The newfound safety of community had left Lynn with something she'd never known before, spare time. A few years earlier, Lucy had followed the ghostly notes of music up to the attic and found Lynn in front of the piano, awkwardly picking out a song that Mother had attempted to teach her on a rainy afternoon in the distant past. The next tune Lynn had tried had brought tears to Lucy's eyes as she recognized a song from her childhood, sung by her uncle in the dying firelight of the camp, as he tried to distract Lucy and Neva from the hunger pains in their bellies. Lynn's fingers hesitated across the keys, and the notes had come out haltingly, played from a memory punctuated by more gunshots than melody. Lucy cleared her throat. I'm on watch for the first time tonight. East Side. Stebbs didn't post you alone, surely. Isn't Maddie or one of the other Johnson girls going to be there with you? I imagine Carter will join me for a bit. I imagine he will, Lynn said. You mind yourself. Lucy let go of the rifle long enough to cross her heart and wink. Promise. There was movement in the yard, and Lynn squinted into the dying sun. Lucy peered through her scope. A massive coyote, old and frail, picked his way down the bank to the pond, placing his mud-caked paws carefully with each step. Lucy aimed the rifle. What's the call? Lynn watched as he reached the pond, his long tongue hungrily lapping at the life-giving water. Leave him be, she said. He's just trying to survive. Same as us all. Alright, that's it. We finished it, guys. So, what did you think? Feel free to leave a comment in this video or in the Discord and let's talk about it. Alright, see you guys later.